Well, hello everyone. I may talk quite quickly, so please forgive me for that. I'd like to start by asking you all to imagine waking up one morning in your room at home. It's a Saturday. You make your way to the window and you see that it's been snowing overnight. It's the first snow of the year. There's an eider-down of snowflakes draped delicately over everything you can see. Now, what's your initial gut reaction as you look out of the window? Put your hands up if you feel a sense of disgust rising. Who doesn't like snow? Okay. Now, put your hands up if you felt something positive looking out of that window. A sense of calm, an appreciation of beauty, that's pretty much everyone. I too would find it beautiful. In those first moments, before the thoughts of wet feet and traffic jams, I would be smiling. But why? Why do we find the year's first snow so beautiful? When you think about it, the world has been robbed of color. All the intricacies of texture have gone. The whole world is just white, blank, dare I say boring. Why should the view be more beautiful than it was the night before? Perhaps it is because the snow moves us to attend to our senses in a way that we forget to when we can rely on past experience and expectation. Why bother paying close attention to something that looks just like it always has? The novelty of the snow demands a fresh examination. And when we take a moment, we pay attention, we stop chasing our own tails, it becomes easier to find beauty. Now, imagine looking out of that window one morning, and instead of seeing less color, you see more. Instead of a dulling of texture, there is a magnification. Imagine that for the past 30 years, you have been trapped in a closed loop of hopelessness, of self-fulfilling worthlessness. You've been unable to find things meaningful or beautiful or to feel wonder. And today, you've been taken out of yourself. The world feels vibrant, alive, magical, and you've rediscovered a connection to it and the people in your life so strong that it moves you to tears. Now, I'd like to share with you a difficult story from my own life about this kind of hopelessness. I was 13 years old, desperate to urinate, standing with my legs crossed outside the bathroom door in my home, when the bathroom door opened and my mother came out, and I saw in her face the most heartbreaking expression I've ever seen. I saw in her an unfathomable sadness, guilt, anguish, remorse. She had just taken 60 sleeping pills and fully expected to be dead before the next sunrise. As it happened, on that occasion, the bureaucrats of death turned down her request, and she spent the next 10 years in the queue for reassessment. I use that rather strange metaphor because for Mum, mortality was not mortifying, not particularly mystical or mysterious. Death was dull, day-to-day, banal, unshocking, less insulting than life. 3 years ago, last Friday, exactly, in that same bathroom, she took enough Nembutal to euthanize a rhino. And when my phone rang in Singapore that evening, where I was working, I knew before I answered that she was dead. As a teenager, trying to come to terms with my mum's mortality and madness, I became absorbed by psychopharmacology and psychiatric research. I believed that if I tried hard enough, I might be able to save her. I realized, watching my mother, that this world around us, this common reality as we naively describe it, is really a running patchwork of innumerate overlapping realities. I realized that the entire way we view the world is fallible, constructed, susceptible to manipulation, and representative of only the smallest slice in the full spectrum of possible human experience. Watching her, I became fascinated by altered states of consciousness. I tried to teach myself about the various states of psychosis, the visionary and prophetic states, near-death experiences, spiritual emergencies, out-of-body experiences. I read up on neuroscience and anthropology and philosophy, believing that somewhere in one of those worlds there might be an answer to my mother's condition. Eventually, I came across a seminal volume on LSD psychotherapy by Stan Grof. This chronicled his experiences as a psychiatrist using LSD as an adjunct to psychotherapy in more than 4,000 clinical sessions with his patients. Grof had discovered, along with hundreds of other researchers, that the states of consciousness induced in their patients by these drugs could amplify and accelerate the therapeutic process. On some occasions, the drugs only needed to be administered once for these breakthroughs to happen. Although he was not the first to say so, Grof wrote that psychedelics might be for psychiatry what the telescope was for astronomy, or the microscope for biology. But could it really be safe? What if it made people worse? The thought of mentioning my new interest to my parents was horrifying. They were very conservative people, and the idea of suggesting it as a therapeutic possibility for my mother was out of the question. 6 times the effective dose of heroin will cause dangerous toxic damage. 10 times the effective dose of alcohol will cause dangerous toxic damage. 15 times the active dose of cocaine will cause dangerous toxic damage. This is called the Therapeutic Index, and it's a measure of how physically harmful a drug is relative to the amounts you're likely to use for a particular purpose. Nobody knows what the Therapeutic Index is for the classical psychedelics, LSD and psilocybin, because nobody has ever died or gone into organ failure or gone blind or lost a leg as a direct result of taking too much. But it is estimated that more than 1,000 times the active dose of these substances would need to be taken to cause toxicity. Not only that, but these drugs do not produce a dependence syndrome. They're not addictive, unlike cocaine, heroin, and alcohol. And as for mental health, 2 recent surveys of more than 130,000 respondents each found that use of psychedelics was linked to a statistically significant reduced risk of suicide and significantly better psychological health in general. But despite all of the available evidence, it is the psychedelics and not these more harmful drugs that the UK continues to categorize as Schedule 1, which means the toughest possible restrictions for scientific and medical access. Now, psychedelics are not absolutely safe. Very little in medicine is, but their risks can be well managed in the clinic. Research published this year, for instance, at Imperial College London, showed that psilocybin could be used safely in the treatment of severe chronic depression. Every participant in this study showed strong improvements in their depressive symptomology for at least 3 weeks after the treatment. Now, more than half of them continued to show improvements 7 weeks after the treatment, and just under half were still in clinical remission. Other research from Harvard, Yale, UCLA, New York University, Johns Hopkins, and various other leading institutions has shown promise for psychedelic therapy in the treatment of end-of-life anxiety, anxiety in autistic adults, chronic depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic pain, opiate addiction, nicotine addiction, cluster headaches. It's a huge collection. A statistical measure called the clinical effect size measures the impact of an intervention. A size of 0.5 is considered medium, and about 0.8 is considered large. Now, at a time where psychiatric research centers in pharmaceutical companies all over the world have been closed down, we haven't had a new drug class in psychiatry for decades, and the current drug therapies perform barely better than placebo, it is relieving, to say the least, to see studies published every year on psychedelic therapy showing clinical effect sizes of 1.5 or 2 or 3. Now, I'm sure many of you are itching for more technical details, and although this talk is too short for that, I do have a printout just over here of some of their leading papers published in this area in the last few years. A recent story in The Guardian told a story of Alice. Alice was an adult participant in a recent study using MDMA-assisted therapy for the treatment of post-traumatic stress. Alice had had an awful childhood, a violent, sexually abusive father. For years, she struggled with panic attacks, gruesome flashbacks, and nightmares. She tried medication for depression and anxiety, various talk therapies, various somatic therapies, and EMDR, which is a therapy that involves eye movements, but all to no avail. And then she signed up to a study with the therapists Annie and Michael Mithofer. And after only 3 sessions of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, a lifetime of post-traumatic stress disorder was gone. The MDMA just pulls things out of you, she said. It supports you. Why does the world look so beautiful the morning after the year's first snow? Because sometimes it takes something new, something different, something dramatic to give us a fresh perspective. And a fresh perspective, one you can really believe in, can do a whole world of good. Of course, many psychedelic sessions in the clinic help in very different ways. For terminal patients suffering with end-of-life anxiety, the highly profound LSD experience simultaneously rubs out both the fear and the desire for death. After LSD psychotherapy, patients are no longer horrified by the idea of dying, but neither are they drawn towards it. They're able to spend their remaining time making the most of every moment. In the case of MDMA-assisted therapy for post-traumatic stress, which is what Alice received, the drug induces a state known as the optimal arousal zone, in which the patient is stimulated enough to want to talk about their trauma, but those defensive fear responses are suppressed. They find themselves able to trust their therapist more. They can access horrifying memories without becoming overwhelmed. In addicts and alcoholics, psychedelic therapy permits them to establish executive control over processes that were previously out of their hands. Now, the current drug laws do permit scientific and medical research. Since 1961, the UN drug conventions have protected research, at least in theory. The reality is, though, that the regulations placed on psychedelic drugs, which are the most stringent, the most draconian placed on any drug, make research financially impractical. Large-scale studies with hundreds or thousands of participants, which is where the really good data comes from, are more or less impossible. And almost all of the research that is happening has to be funded by private, non-corporate philanthropy. My own small part in all of this has been to try to advance psychedelic science by building a community and opening up the conversation. I started student societies in psychedelic studies at the University of Kent and King's College London, and I now direct a program in drug-assisted psychotherapies at the Institute of Psychiatry. Slowly but surely, public perception is catching up with the science. I also sit on the board of directors for 2 UK charities, and one of these charities runs one of the largest psychedelics conferences in the world. But honestly, these events can only take us so far. 1,000 people sit in a room listening to cutting-edge research, but a whole world goes on by, reading drug scare stories in the tabloids and not giving a hoot about psychedelic science. In England, we keep hitting a barrier, the drug laws that make research near impossible. So where does Guernsey come in? What could be achieved here that cannot yet be achieved elsewhere? There is a rare and tremendous opportunity here in Guernsey to directly affect the lives of huge numbers of people for the better. With only a few small changes in your legislation, Guernsey could become a world leader in psychiatric science, with enormous benefits for both local and international mental health patients. The healthcare tourism boom might be enormous. What psychedelic research really needs is a place to collect data where research centers are freed from the shackles of out-of-date obstructive drug laws. It's happening slowly, all around the world, but from the patient perspective, every day counts. I know this better than most. I often wonder what would have happened if I had taken my mother and my family to some remote, picturesque wood in the Dutch countryside and given her psilocybin. I know plenty of psychedelic therapists. I could have done it legally and responsibly, but I didn't, and I was too late, and I will never have that opportunity. However, in this world, there are countless people just like my mum, people who have no wonder left, who have no awe, who have no hope, no reason to live, no time left, no choice in any of it, no chance. Psychedelic therapy offers us a possibility to treat these patients that is unlike anything we have ever seen before in psychiatry. Psychedelics are no magic bullets. They're not a panacea. They're not going to save the world, man. But together, I hope we can help save some. Thank you.